Now, just 2 days after the Prime Minister's speech, one headline spelt out yesterday that our terror threat is the highest since 9/11. That was the Mail on Sunday yesterday. So let's bring to the conversation Tom Wilson, who's Director of Policy at the Counter-Extremism Group, joining me now. What is driving this increase in extremist behaviour, would you say, Mr. Wilson? Good morning.
Well, the current increase that we're seeing, the current threat, is coming from two main ideologies, one of which the Prime Minister mentioned quite a bit in his speech. That's Islamist extremism. The one he didn't mention really is far-left extremism. And a lot of the intimidation that you've seen of MPs, people protesting outside their homes, some of the demonstrations outside Parliament, those have been to do with far-left groups. And I think it's important that we talk about the extreme left as well as the Islamist threat, which is being spoken about a bit more at the moment.
Well, tell us more. Tell us what you want to about the extreme left threat.
Well, I think that when you look at groups that are using the kinds of disruption tactics that we've now seen from some of the Gaza protests, blocking bridges, for instance, trying to shut down train stations, attacking the Elbit factories, which also supply the British military, it's clear that elements of the extreme left aren't using the normal democratic process, and that some of that does also go into terrorism too, because we saw last week there was an individual convicted, a far-left extremist, who had expressed a will to murder MPs, an interest in car bombs, for instance. So obviously we saw, terribly, Sir David Amos was murdered by an Islamist terrorist. Seen Joe Cox murdered by a far-right terrorist. But there is something happening on the left, an increased willingness to talk about violence and glorify violence at some of these demonstrations, to celebrate terrorism, the kind of violence we saw in the Bristol riots used against police officers, for instance. And I think that has to be addressed by this government as well.
And does it have to be addressed by our police forces? Is their presence strong enough?
I think that everybody looking at what's been going on at the recent Gaza demonstrations would say that the police, for a number of reasons, have not been able to be strong enough. I mean, I think that they have concerns that if they attempt to go into a group of people chanting things or holding placards and arrest there and then, they'll face a riot and they won't be able to deal with the numbers. But that essentially means that the police are being forced to look on and see law-breaking take place. I hope that after the speech made by the Prime Minister, the police will change tact, because the fact is I think the reason that this is getting worse and worse is because there's a sense by demonstrators that they can get away with these things. And I think we're also seeing that with some of the preaching that we've seen. There's been a big story in the Telegraph about mosque sermons, and these have been highlighted to the police before, but if people aren't arrested for incitement, then they're given the green light to continue doing so.
Tom Wilson, you're Director of Policy at the Counter-Extremism Group. Thank you.